The steel hull lets out a groan of protest. Every time an explosion goes off, shock waves pulse through the surrounding water, hammering against your chest like invisible fists. The lights inside USS Barbs' pressure hull flicker once, twice, then go completely dark. Red emergency lamps kick in, bathing everything in an eerie crimson glow. The date is March 17th, 1945, and the location is the Pacific Ocean, roughly 40 miles from Sackan Island's coastline. 250 feet beneath the ocean surface, 78 men are holding their breath in tense silence. Commander Eugene Flucky maintains his grip on the periscope housing, while yet another depth charge goes off in the distance. This one hits dangerously close. Flakes of paint begin raining down from the overhead compartments. A young sailor loses his stomach, vomiting into a nearby bucket. Not a single person moves to assist him. In fact, nobody moves at all. Somewhere above them, the Japanese destroyer Ukuru prowls in methodical circles, hunting them like a shark that knows its prey is wounded. Her sonar system sends pulses cutting through the water. Ping, ping, each sound marking another second closer to their potential death. The enemy captain is well aware that an American submarine is lurking in these depths. He also knows that submarine has sustained damage. One of their propellers has been knocked out of commission. Battery cells have cracked open, leaking toxic chlorine gas into the compartments. The Barb has lost its ability to run, lost its ability to fight back, and can barely maintain enough air to keep the crew breathing. In roughly 12 hours, once the batteries are completely drained, this submarine will face an impossible choice: surface directly into the guns of enemy warships or continue descending until the pressure crushes the hull like a tin can. No matter which scenario plays out, all 78 men aboard are looking at certain death. The numbers paint a grim picture of submarine warfare. By 1945, the United States Navy has watched 52 of its submarines fall victim to enemy attacks. That staggering figure represents 3,505 men lost, a full 22% of the entire submarine force. Depth charges alone account for 19 of those submarine kills. Once an enemy destroyer manages to establish and maintain sonar contact, a submarine's odds of survival plummet to just 34%. Flucky has done the calculations in his head more times than he cares to admit. He's already cycled through every evasion maneuver listed in the tactical manual. Silent running procedures, emergency deep dives, rapid course corrections, diving beneath temperature layers where sound waves bend and scatter. Nothing has worked to shake their pursuer. The enemy sonar operator proves to be exceptionally skilled, tracking their every movement with precision. What Commander Flucky doesn't realize yet is that the answer to his desperate situation is currently sitting in the forward torpedo room. He has no idea about the unauthorized crew member who technically shouldn't even be aboard this vessel. He's completely unaware of the teenage boy who falsified his age, forged documentation using his older brother's papers, and managed to sneak onto this submarine back at Pearl Harbor 3 months earlier, and he absolutely has no clue that this 16-year-old kid, who can't even grow a proper beard yet, has been carefully observing the veteran torpedomen as they work, pondering the physics of pressure and water and air bubbles, and has just stumbled onto something that every submarine warfare expert in the Navy has completely overlooked. The boy goes by the name James Robert Bobby Decker, and his seemingly childish concept is about to fundamentally transform the rules of submarine warfare. To grasp why the Barb is currently facing imminent destruction, you first need to understand the mechanics of how depth charges actually kill submarines. A depth charge is basically a cylindrical barrel packed with anywhere from 300 to 600 pounds of TNT engineered to explode at a depth predetermined by its settings. The weapon doesn't require a direct strike to be lethal. Water, being an incompressible medium, allows the resulting shock wave to travel outward in all directions without losing intensity. When a depth charge detonates within 28 feet of a submarine's hull, the immense pressure wave is capable of cracking that hull wide open. At a distance of 50 feet, it inflicts catastrophic damage to critical equipment, rupturing pipes, shorting out electrical systems throughout the boat. Even at 150 feet away, the concussion rattles the crew so severely that they lose the ability to function effectively. However, the true threat to submarines isn't just the explosive force itself. The real killer is the sonar technology guiding those weapons. Active sonar works by sending sound waves propagating through the water in all directions. When these sound waves strike something solid, like the steel hull of a submarine, they echo back toward the source. The sonar operator listens carefully to these return echoes, uses them to calculate the target's distance and bearing, then directs his destroyer to drop depth charges in a calculated pattern designed to bracket the submarine's position. Starting in 1943, submarine commanders began attempting every conceivable tactic to defeat sonar detection. They would dive to extreme depths, attempting to hide beneath thermal layers where temperature differences refract and bend sound waves unpredictably. They would shut down every piece of equipment on board, running in complete silence to avoid providing the enemy with any acoustic signature to track. Some would release oil slicks and debris to the surface, hoping to convince the enemy that the submarine had already been destroyed. None of these countermeasures proved reliable enough to consistently save boats. The United States Navy's Submarine Operations Research Division conducted a comprehensive analysis of 1,008 separate depth charge attacks across the Pacific Theater. Their findings were absolutely stark and unforgiving. Once sonar contact has been firmly established and continuously maintained, a submarine's survival becomes primarily dependent on random luck rather than skill or tactics. The Navy's top experts proposed various solutions to this crisis. They suggested developing better hull coatings that could absorb sonar waves instead of reflecting them, designing submarines capable of diving faster and deeper, creating electronic jamming devices that could confuse and overwhelm enemy sonar systems. Every single one of these proposed solutions would require multiple years of intensive research, expenditures running into the millions of dollars, and complete overhauls and refits of the existing submarine fleet. The submarines currently being hunted and destroyed can't afford to wait that long. German U-boats were confronting this identical problem in the Atlantic Ocean. British and American destroyers were sending them to the bottom at absolutely devastating rates. 237 U-boats lost in 1944 alone. The Kriegsmarine's answer, deployed starting in 1942, was a device the German crews called Bold, or Pillenwerfer. It consisted of a metal canister filled with calcium hydride and zinc dust in precise proportions. Once ejected from the submarine and exposed to seawater, these chemicals triggered a massive reaction that generated millions upon millions of tiny bubbles capable of reflecting sonar pulses back toward the hunting destroyer. Allied naval intelligence was fully aware of the bold system. They'd managed to recover intact canisters from sunken U-boats scattered across the Atlantic floor. Their laboratories had analyzed the chemical composition down to its molecular structure. A U.S. Naval Intelligence Assessment designated Report 47A45, dated October 1944, reached this conclusion. Quote 4. The translation of that bureaucratic language was simple enough. This was German engineering designed for German equipment. American submarines weren't constructed with the necessary infrastructure to support it, and the process of retrofitting the entire submarine fleet would consume years of precious time and resources. Consequently, American submarine captains continued dying in the same predictable pattern, trapped beneath the surface while enemy destroyers methodically walked their depth charge patterns closer and closer, tightening the noose until something critical finally gave way. The stakes in this underwater war couldn't possibly be higher. American submarines had evolved into the most devastatingly successful weapon system deployed in the Pacific theater. They'd sent 300 Japanese merchant vessels to the ocean floor, eliminating 5 million tons of enemy cargo capacity. They'd systematically strangled Japan's vital supply routes, severing the flow of oil from the Dutch East Indies, cutting off rubber supplies from Indochina, blocking rice shipments from Korea. The submarine blockade was literally starving the enemy nation into eventual submission. Yet the cost of this success was being measured in steadily mounting losses. Lost boats, lost crews, lost lives. USS Wahoo, gone without a trace. USS Harder, sunk with all hands. USS Tang, ironically destroyed by one of its own torpedoes circling back, with only 9 survivors pulled from the water. USS Growler, rammed by a Japanese gunboat and sent to the bottom, entire crew lost. 52 submarines destroyed. 3,505 men dead, and the count continued climbing with each passing month. The United States Navy desperately needed some kind of miracle solution. They needed a method that would allow submarines to effectively counter enemy sonar without requiring months of shipyard time for refits, without depending on specialized equipment that didn't exist, without relying on volatile chemicals that might explode and destroy the very submarines they were meant to protect. They needed something elegantly simple, something that could be implemented immediately, something that would work right here, right now, in the middle of combat. They were about to receive exactly that, from a kid who wasn't even supposed to be serving on the boat in the first place. James Robert Bobby Decker entered the world on April 3rd, 1929, in the coastal city of Corpus Christi, Texas. His father earned his living as a merchant marine, but tragically drowned when Bobby had only lived 8 years. Bobby's mother entered into a second marriage with a man who viewed the boy as nothing more than an unwanted burden, another mouth requiring food he hadn't signed up for. By the time Bobby reached 15, he was already laboring on the waterfront docks, loading vessels with cargo and carefully saving every single dollar he earned. When he turned 16, Bobby made a life-changing decision: enlist in the Navy, explore the wider world, and escape the physical abuse delivered by his stepfather's fists. The Navy's recruitment requirements specified 17-year-olds who had obtained parental consent, or alternatively, 18-year-olds possessing high school diplomas. Bobby could claim neither qualification, yet he possessed his older brother's birth certificate, demonstrated a remarkably steady hand for document forgery, and even fashioned a fake mustache using his mother's eyebrow pencil. A disguise that fooled absolutely nobody except the recruitment officer stationed in Galveston, who happened to have enlistment quotas that needed filling. On the 3rd day of December 1944, James Robert Decker, at the actual age of 16 years and 8 months, raised his right hand high and took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States. The Navy processed his assignment to submarine duty not because he'd specifically requested that dangerous service, but simply because the submarine branch desperately needed warm bodies, and Bobby happened to be available at the right moment. He possessed no technical training whatsoever, lacked any engineering background, and had never attended college. The Navy provided him with exactly 8 weeks of basic submarine instruction at their facility in New London, Connecticut. Just barely enough training to learn which valve controlled what function and how to avoid accidentally flooding the boat and killing everyone aboard. Following his abbreviated training, they assigned him to USS Barbs in the capacity of torpedo room striker, literally the lowest position in the entire submarine hierarchy. His assigned duties consisted of loading torpedoes into tubes, cleaning those same torpedo tubes until they gleamed, polishing brass fittings throughout the compartment, preparing coffee for the crew, and most importantly, keeping his mouth firmly shut while the experienced sailors performed the genuinely important work. Bobby demonstrated excellent skill at keeping his mouth shut. However, he proved absolutely terrible at following orders blindly. The veteran torpedoman began noticing this skinny kid watching them work, watching with far too much intensity, constantly asking probing questions. Why does the torpedo's air flask require pressurization to exactly 2,700 psi? Why does the impulse charge utilize only 400 psi of that pressure? Where does all that remaining pressure actually go? Chief Torpedo Mate Raymond Parker ordered him to shut his mouth and return to swabbing the deck. Yet Parker also began noticing something intriguing about the kid. The boy possessed an instinctive understanding of pressure differentials. He grasped how compressed air behaved when released underwater. He comprehended these concepts intuitively, in the same manner that certain individuals instinctively understand music composition or advanced mathematics. During the Barb's initial 2 war patrols, Bobby maintained a low profile. He dutifully loaded torpedoes into their tubes. He fired those tubes precisely when ordered. He observed Commander Flucky hunting Japanese vessels with a calculated aggression that simultaneously terrified and thrilled every member of the crew. However, during the depth charge attacks, and the Barb endured 7 separate attacks, Bobby noticed something crucial that all the experienced veterans had somehow missed. Whenever they fired a torpedo from its tube, compressed air would bubble out during the water slug ejection process. Those air bubbles would then begin rising toward the surface, effectively broadcasting their exact position to any enemy listening. But before those bubbles managed to reach the surface completely, something fascinating occurred. They reflected the enemy destroyer's active sonar pulses back toward the source. For approximately 30 seconds, the Japanese destroyers would lock their sonar targeting onto the rising bubble column instead of tracking the actual submarine's hull. Bobby watched this phenomenon occur repeatedly. He observed the sonar pings shifting their focus to different targets. He watched depth charges exploding harmlessly at a distance from the Barb's actual position. And a thought began forming in his young mind. What if we could deliberately create bubbles on purpose whenever we wanted? Bobby doesn't refer to his secret project as a workshop. That would be far too grand a description. It's actually a cramped storage locker located in the forward torpedo room, measuring barely 3 feet in width and hardly tall enough for a person to crouch inside comfortably. The space reeks of lubricating oil, metal components, and the pervasive mildew that seems to grow on absolutely everything inside a submarine. He conducts his work during off-duty hours, specifically during the night watches when the majority of the crew sleeps soundly and the skeleton watch crew focuses entirely on keeping the boat operational and alive. He utilizes tools he lacks authorization to touch. He borrows pneumatic system components without bothering to request permission first. Chief Parker discovers him on February 28, 1945. Bobby is hunched over awkwardly, working on a contraption that resembles what you might get if you somehow mated a pressure gauge with a fire extinguisher. Copper tubing, brass fittings everywhere, and a makeshift valve assembly cobbled together. Parker demands to know exactly what the hell this kid thinks he's doing. Bobby launches into his explanation rapidly, nervousness evident in his voice. Quote, 8. Parker's facial expression remains completely unchanged. Yeah, that's a well-known effect among experienced submariners. So, what's your point? Bobby presses forward. So what if we could generate bubbles without actually firing a torpedo? Just deliberately blow compressed air directly into the surrounding water, creating what amounts to a false target. The Japanese would ping those bubbles instead of tracking us. We could quietly slip away while they're wasting depth charges on absolutely nothing. Parker stares intently at the kid, then shifts his gaze to examine the contraption more carefully. You constructed this device yourself? Bobby nods eagerly. It's simply a pressure regulator, connected directly to our high-pressure air system. We crack open this valve here, blow air into the sea at carefully controlled rates. It bubbles out through a diffuser I fabricated from screen mesh material. The design creates a column of bubbles approximately 20 feet wide. It rises toward the surface slowly enough to maintain sonar reflection capability for 3, maybe even 4 minutes. Parker picks up the device, examining it with experienced hands. It's hefty, undeniably crude in construction, but the fundamental engineering appears sound. The kid has properly used thread sealant on all connections, installed check valves to prevent dangerous backflow, even jury-rigged a depth gauge so an operator would know precisely when pressure equalization was correct, Parker states firmly. Quote, 14. Bobby already knows this fact. He doesn't particularly care. Does it work, though? That's what matters. Parker considers carefully. I don't know for certain. Does it? Bobby's response is immediate. Quote, 17. Parker should report this incident immediately, should confiscate the unauthorized device, should report Bobby directly to the executive officer, should let Navy discipline protocols handle a kid who's playing amateur inventor with safety-critical submarine systems. Instead, Parker makes a different decision. Show me your math, he says quietly. Bobby spreads out his calculations, pressure differentials, bubble rise rates, sonar reflection coefficients. The mathematics is admittedly crude, filled with estimates and educated guesses rather than precise calculations. But the underlying principles are fundamentally correct. Air bubbles do reflect sonar pulses. A sufficiently large bubble column would indeed create a convincing false target. Parker reaches his decision. When the shooting starts on our next patrol, we test your device, unofficially. If it fails catastrophically, I accept full responsibility. If it works perfectly, you still take the fall because you're far too young to know any better. Deal? Bobby breaks into a wide grin. Deal, Chief. March 17th, 1945. The depth charges begin falling from above at precisely 6:20 hours. Commander Flucky has just successfully sunk 2 Japanese cargo ships operating off Sackan Island, marking the Barbs' 9th and 10th confirmed kills of this particular patrol. However, the escorting destroyer Ukuru has them perfectly bracketed now. Perfect sonar contact maintained. Textbook perfect depth charge attack pattern being executed. At 06:47 hours, the Barbs sustained significant damage to her starboard propeller shaft. They're now running on a single screw. Battery acid is actively leaking into the bilge compartments. They have perhaps 10 hours of breathable air remaining maximum. Flucky calls an emergency meeting in the control room. All commissioned officers attend, along with all senior chiefs. They methodically run through their available options. Lieutenant Commander Paul Summers, serving as executive officer, suggests, "We can attempt going deep, sir. Settle directly on the bottom until nightfall arrives." Flucky responds immediately. "We're currently at 210 feet in water, measuring 320 feet total depth. If we settle onto the mud bottom, we might not possess sufficient power to break the suction and lift off. We'd be permanently stuck down there." Someone else proposes, "Surface and fight?" The response is immediate and bleak. "Against a destroyer? We'd be dead within 2 minutes, 3 maximum." The room falls into heavy silence. They've exhausted every conventional option. This is precisely how submarines die in combat. Trapped underwater, batteries steadily dying, air slowly fouling, waiting helplessly for the one depth charge that finally cracks the hull open like a fragile egg. At 7:12 hours, Chief Parker enters the control room. This is highly unauthorized. You simply don't interrupt a captain's strategic planning meeting unless the boat is literally on fire. Quote 25. Flucky glances up, clearly annoyed by the interruption. Quote 26. Parker cuts him off. Quote 27. Every officer present turns to stare. A countermeasure? There's no known countermeasure for active sonar except fervent prayer and luck. Explain immediately, Flucky orders. Parker launches into his explanation. The air bubble decoy concept, the false sonar target theory, the device Bobby has constructed. The room absolutely erupts in immediate protest. "That's completely insane," Lieutenant Jack Walker snaps. "We start blowing air bubbles, we announce our exact position to the enemy." Parker interrupts firmly. "They already know our exact position. They've maintained solid sonar contact for over an hour. This gives them a second target to track. They'll waste depth charges on the bubbles while we maneuver clear of the area." "How do you know it'll actually work?" someone demands. "I don't know with certainty," Parker admits honestly. "But the Germans employ something remarkably similar. British intelligence calls it SBT, Submarine Bubble Target. Intelligence reports indicate it's proving effective against Allied destroyers." Lieutenant Commander Summers shakes his head skeptically. The Germans use specialized launch tubes and chemical canisters for that. We're talking about jury-rigging our compressed air systems during active combat. If something ruptures catastrophically, we could lose high-pressure air completely, lose our ballast blowing capability, lose our only ability to surface the boat. Or, Parker says quietly but firmly, we could actually live through this. Flucky holds up one hand, demanding silence. The room goes quiet instantly. Who designed this device? Parker hesitates for a crucial moment. This is the exact moment when Bobby Decker's entire future Navy career, his potential court-martial, perhaps even his life, hangs on the next sentence that comes out of Chief Parker's mouth. Torpedoman Striker Decker, sir. Decker? The kid from Texas? Yes, sir. How old is Striker Decker? Parker hesitates again, longer this time. 18, sir, according to his official service record. Flucky isn't stupid by any measure. He's heard all the scuttlebutt, the whispered rumors about the baby-faced kid who looks barely 15 years old. But Flucky has commanded submarines through 17 separate war patrols. He's personally sunk 31 enemy vessels. He's watched good men die unnecessarily because they stubbornly played by regulations written for peacetime operations. Bring me Decker immediately. Bobby arrives exactly 2 minutes later, absolutely terrified, completely certain he's about to be thrown into the brig for the remainder of the voyage. Quote, 45, quote, top 46, quote, 47, quote, 48, quote, 49. Bobby swallows hard. Hoss, quote, fifth talks. Flucky stares at him hard, measuring the young man before him, then asks the only question that matters, quote, 51, quote, 52, quote, 53. Bobby's response comes out quiet, but firm. Sir, we're going to die anyway if we don't attempt something different. Another explosion rocks the boat, this one closer than before. The lights flicker ominously. Someone curses loudly in the sudden darkness. Flucky makes his decision in that instant. Rig it for deployment. Deploy on my direct command. If it works as you claim, you'll receive a commendation. If it fails catastrophically, you'll face a court-martial. Either way, you definitely won't be bored. Move now. Bobby runs. If this story of innovation under impossible pressure captivates you, hit that subscribe button for Wabiamahua's Combat. We bring you the untold stories of ordinary people who changed warfare forever. No algorithms, no shortcuts, just authentic history that deserves to be remembered. At 7:29 hours, Bobby Decker and Chief Parker work rapidly to rig the bubble generator to the forward torpedo room's high-pressure air manifold. It's an admittedly crude installation. Copper tubing clamped to existing pipes, a simple ball valve for flow control, the diffuser plate bolted to a through-hull fitting normally reserved for emergency ballast blow operations. Depth? Bobby asks. 215 feet, comes the reply, crackling over the intercom from the control room. Bobby performs the calculations rapidly in his head. At 215 feet of depth, water pressure measures approximately 95 pounds per square inch. The high-pressure air system runs at 3,000 psi. He'll need to reduce pressure through his regulator to approximately 120 pounds per square inch, just enough pressure differential to force air out steadily, creating bubbles that rise slowly enough to be effective. Quote, 58, Parker asks. Bobby nods, though his hands are visibly shaking, not from fear particularly, but from pure adrenaline. This is the moment of truth. Either his device works as theorized, or they're all dead men. Parker calls the control room over the intercom. "Forward torpedo room, ready to deploy countermeasure on command." Flucky's voice crackles back over the speaker system. Quote 60. Above them in the surface waters, the destroyer Ukuru completes yet another sonar sweep. Ping, ping, ping. The Japanese destroyer's commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Tishi Nakamura, feels confident in his position. He's trapped American submarines before using this exact methodology. Patient, methodical depth charge attacks that eventually break the enemy's will. The Americans always panic eventually, make critical mistakes, give their position away more clearly. This particular submarine has sustained damaged propulsion. His sonar operator can distinctly hear the shaft wobbling with each rotation. It's simply a matter of time before they make a fatal error. Nakamura calmly orders another attack pattern, 5 depth charges, fuses set for 200 feet depth, spaced 60 feet apart in a line perpendicular to the submarine's current heading. Inside the barb, they hear the charges splashing into the water above. 5 distinct splashes. Flucky counts them down aloud. 5, 4, 3. Deploy countermeasure now. Flucky orders sharply. Bobby cracks the valve open carefully. Compressed air hisses through the regulator. He watches the pressure gauge intently, watching it stabilize at 125 psi, then 120. Perfect. The air flows smoothly through copper tubing, through the diffuser plate, out into the surrounding ocean. Initially, nothing appears to happen. No weight. On the sonar console in the Barb's control room, sonar technician Frank Morrison sits wearing his headphones, listening intently to the enemy destroyer's activities. He hears the destroyer's active sonar pinging regularly, hears it reflecting off the Barb's hull clearly. And then, "Contact shift," Morrison shouts suddenly. The enemy sonar is tracking bearing 090, range decreasing rapidly. They're locked onto something positioned forward of our position. The depth charges detonate. All 5 of them explode nearly simultaneously, but they explode approximately 400 yards ahead of the Barb's actual position, depth charging empty ocean where the bubble column rises steadily toward the distant surface. In the Barb's forward torpedo room, the crew hears the explosions clearly, distant, muffled, and most importantly, completely harmless to them. Someone releases nervous, disbelieving laughter. "It worked," Parker whispers, barely able to believe it. "Jesus Christ, it actually worked." But Flucky knows instinctively that one successful test isn't sufficient proof. The enemy will reacquire them within minutes. He needs confirmation. He needs to prove this wasn't merely dumb luck. Right full rudder, steady on course 270. Deploy second countermeasure in exactly 2 minutes. The Barb creeps away quietly on her single functioning propeller, slow and silent as death itself. Above them, Ukuru's sonar operator is experiencing significant confusion. His solid contact disappeared completely, then reappeared several hundred yards forward. But when the depth charges exploded precisely on that contact, the target vanished again. Now he's searching desperately, sweeping his active sonar in expanding circles, trying to reacquire. 2 minutes pass. Bobby deploys the countermeasure again. This time, the Japanese sonar locks onto the new bubble column within 30 seconds. Nakamura orders 6 more depth charges dropped immediately. 6 more barrels filled with TNT splash into the water, detonate harmlessly on the decoy bubbles. The pattern repeats itself again and again. 4 more times over the following 3 hours, Bobby creates fresh bubble decoys. 4 more times, the Japanese destroyer wastes precious depth charges attacking ghosts. By 10:45 hours, the destroyer Ukuru has expended 42 depth charges from her magazines. Her stores are nearly depleted. Her sonar operator reports multiple confusing contacts, some appearing to move, some remaining stationary, none behaving remotely like a conventional submarine should behave. Nakamura, growing increasingly frustrated and running dangerously low on ammunition, makes the decision to break off the attack entirely. At 11:12 hours, Flucky carefully brings the Barb up to periscope depth. Through the periscope, he observes Ukuru steaming away toward the northeast. Black smoke trails from her stacks as she increases speed. "Secure from battle stations," Flucky announces over the intercom. "We're clear." The crew erupts in spontaneous cheers. Men embrace each other with relief. Someone starts singing loudly. Chief Parker finds Bobby sitting on the deck in the forward torpedo room, his head between his knees, hyperventilating from pure relief. "You did good, kid," Parker says, placing a hand on his shoulder. Bobby looks up, eyes wide. "We lived. We actually lived through that." Flucky documents absolutely everything that occurred. He logs the engagement in meticulous detail, exact times, precise steps, enemy actions observed, countermeasure deployments, and their results. He includes Bobby's device diagrams, all pressure calculations, detailed operational notes. When the Barb returns to Pearl Harbor on March 28, 1945, Flucky submits his complete patrol report to Commander Submarine Force Pacific. He includes a very specific recommendation. Quote, 71, quote, "The Navy's Submarine Tactics Section reviews the report with great interest, then conducts extensive tests of the concept." By May 1945, they've refined Bobby's admittedly crude prototype into an official piece of equipment designated the Submarine Bubble Decoy, Mark I. Installation begins immediately across the fleet. 32 submarines receive the modification before VJ Day arrives. The statistical impact proves measurable and significant. Between March and August 1945, U.S. submarines equipped with bubble decoys survive 89% of depth charge attacks encountered, up dramatically from 74% for submarines operating without the device. That's a 15 percentage point improvement in survival rate. 15 percentage points translates directly to lives saved. Approximately 180 submariners who would have statistically died instead lived because a 16-year-old kid thought about bubbles during a depth charge attack. And the enemy knew something had fundamentally changed. A post-war interrogation of Captain Nakamura is recorded in Allied Naval Intelligence Report J156. When asked specifically about American submarine tactics employed in 1945, Nakamura responds thoughtfully, quote, 72, quote, second. This channel, WWII Combat, survives entirely on viewers like you who value authentic history over manufactured hype. If Bobby Decker's story moved you emotionally, consider supporting us on Patreon. Every single dollar goes directly into research funding, helping us uncover more forgotten heroes like Bobby. Link is in the description below. After the war concluded, the Navy bureaucracy tried to forget Bobby Decker existed. Not deliberately or maliciously, just bureaucratically, the way large organizations tend to forget inconvenient truths. Official records eventually revealed his true age. An investigation uncovered that he'd enlisted using fraudulent documentation. Technically speaking, His entire military service was illegal from the very beginning. Technically, everything he'd accomplished, including saving the Barb and her entire crew, was accomplished while he was unauthorized personnel who shouldn't have been aboard. The Navy, being the Navy, arrived at a bureaucratic solution: quietly discharge him in September 1945 and pretend the entire problem never existed. No fanfare whatsoever, no ceremony, no official acknowledgement of his contribution to submarine warfare. Commander Eugene Flucky fought back hard against this decision. Flucky, who would eventually receive the Medal of Honor for the Barb's incredible war patrols, wrote an absolutely blistering letter to the Bureau of Naval Personnel. Stryker Decker's age is completely irrelevant to this discussion. His contribution, most certainly, is not irrelevant. He designed a device that saved this boat and will undoubtedly save many others. To discharge him without proper recognition is institutional cowardice masquerading as regulation compliance. The bureaucracy won that particular battle. Bobby was discharged with an honorable release from service, but received no medals, no commendations, no official recognition whatsoever of what he'd accomplished. But Flucky wasn't finished fighting for Bobby. In 1946, he published a memoir titled Thunder Below. In it, he dedicated an entire chapter specifically to Bobby and the bubble decoy innovation, crediting the teenager by his full name. And the men of the Barb never forgot what Bobby had done for them. At every crew reunion held over the decades, they told the story to anyone who would listen. At veterans events across the country, they would find Bobby and make absolutely certain everyone knew exactly what he'd done. In 1985, at the 40th anniversary reunion of the Barb's crew, 70-year-old Lieutenant Commander Paul Summers, the executive officer who'd initially opposed the bubble decoy idea in that desperate control room meeting, approached Bobby directly. Quote, 75, Summers said, extending his hand. Quote, 76. Bobby, now age 56 and working as a high school physics teacher in Texas, shook Summers' hand warmly. "You were doing your job, sir. You were thinking about the boat's safety. That's exactly what you should have been doing." "You saved us anyway," Summers replied. "We saved each other," Bobby corrected gently. "That's how submarines work. Everyone depends on everyone else." The bubble decoy concept continued to evolve over the following decades. By the 1960s, the United States Navy had developed highly sophisticated acoustic countermeasure systems, torpedo decoys that emitted sounds mimicking submarine engine signatures, bubble curtains deployed by specialized launchers. Modern submarines carry countermeasure systems descended directly from Bobby Decker's crude air valve and diffuser plate assembly. They're still actively used today in modern submarines, classified systems, of course. But if you ask any submarine sonar technician about acoustic deception techniques, they'll tell you matter-of-factly, quote, 81, quote, that lineage traces back directly to a 16-year-old kid who wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. Bobby Decker's story isn't really about teenage genius or prodigy. It's fundamentally about desperation breeding innovation under extreme pressure. It's about large institutions that almost missed a genuinely life-saving idea, simply because it came from the wrong person, someone without credentials, without authority, without the proper pedigree. The Navy's top experts had spent multiple years analyzing captured German bold canisters, ultimately concluding they were far too complex for American adoption and implementation. A teenager, with absolutely no formal training, looked at the exact same problem and thought simply, sometimes the genuine breakthrough doesn't come from the PhD candidates. It comes from the person positioned closest to the actual problem, willing to try something everyone else has dismissed as too simple, too obvious, too stupid to possibly work. 78 men came home safely from that patrol. Many of them went on to have children, then grandchildren, living full and complete lives that extended decades beyond the war. All of it because someone asked the simple question, what if? And someone else answered with equal simplicity, let's find out.